Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's Julie Harris with the Harris Real Estate University, and welcome to today's session of the Friday interview with the Superstar. So we'll be getting started at the top of the hour, which is on time, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's 12 noon for those of you on the East Coast, and somewhere in between for the rest of you. So I look forward to this great interview, and you will want to be taking notes and asking questions. Some of you are new to the webinar series, so you'll want to notice a little box in the upper left-hand corner of your screen where it says type your question here with a little send button. So make sure that you're using that throughout the entire session. We will officially get started again in a couple of minutes, and when we do, that box will still be there for you to ask your live questions. Chris, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Good to hear your voice, and Tim will be joining us shortly. We're really excited about interviewing this morning. So you have to put up with my pre-call ramp-up first for just a couple of minutes.
No problem.
All right, excellent. So all of you, our great listeners, just heard from Mr. Chris Townson, the #1 RE/MAX agent and someone who absolutely specializes in foreclosed properties and distressed property and is in a very competitive market as well. So we're really excited to bring you this interview this morning with Chris. And again, as I said, you'll want to take some notes. Make sure you ask your live questions. Just a quick reminder, we have added lots of new students in the past 30 days, especially in the past 2 weeks, to Harris Real Estate University. So if you are a brand new student, this is not your short sale or REO call, and it is not your scripts or prospecting call with me. This is our bonus to you that happens on every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon on the East Coast. And this is in addition to your regular classes. So all of you who have recently enrolled with us will be getting your own personalized ramp-up call from one of our special customer service staff, and they've been calling you and trying to get a hold of you. So make sure that you have that ramp-up call and you know when your regular classes are. Again, this is not your regular class. This is your bonus on Friday, the Friday interview with the Superstar Series. Tim, are you on?
I am, and I'm going to hit the record button so you can
Ready
jump.
When you are.
You can just jump off, okay?
Yep, you got it.
Good morning, everyone. This is Tim Harris, and this is the Harris Real Estate University Superstar Interview. So, as many of you know, because you listen to these Superstar interviews every single week, Harris Real Estate University Superstar Interviews is our effort to give back to the real estate community. So one of three things happens on these Superstar interviews. On Friday, we'll interview an author, someone who's written a book that I think might be a benefit to you in the real estate community, maybe an economist or maybe somebody that, just somebody who I think is interesting that you might benefit from. And other Fridays, what we'll do is we'll interview, typically it's going to be a superstar, like we are today, Mr. Chris Townson, who was the #1 RE/MAX agent in 2009 from having listed and sold more REOs than any other RE/MAX agent. So that is today's focus. And then on other Fridays, what Julie and I do is we present information that's designed to help you and encourage you in your business. But back to the topic, superstar interview, Chris Townson. Chris, welcome to the call.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
A little bit boxy. Are you on a speaker?
How's that?
That's a little bit better, yeah. You must be on a headphone or something. Yeah, it's fine. All right, so, Chris, tell them about who you are, tell them about where you sell real estate, and then we can just jump into the questions.
Okay, Chris Townson. I'm with RE/MAX here in San Diego. Sell real estate in all of San Diego County, South Riverside, and South Orange County. I've been an active full-time realtor for 22 years.
So you have a lot of recent and really career-wide accomplishments that are worth mentioning, and I'll read some of these off. You're an REO MAC and an NA HREP member. Obviously, you're a Harris Real Estate University Superstar. You're a Equator Certified Platinum Agent, Pre-Foreclosure Specialist Certified. You were the #1 REO agent for RE/MAX in 2009, top 7 RE/MAX United States 2009, top 15 RE/MAX worldwide 2009. And you think you told me yesterday that you're like top 50 right now in the world for RE/MAX. Well, I have a question for you. How is it that you're so successful now when so many other agents are struggling? Especially, as Julie pointed out in the pre-call, when you're selling in a market that, let's be honest, it's suffered a lot of depreciation, but still it has to be, Chris, one of the most competitive markets for realtors in all the nation, and yet you are finding so much success. What makes you so different?
Wow. That makes me sound like I'm so important, and
well,
I don't
you are at least,
myself.
Chris, you are at least for the next hour.
Excellent. Can we get my wife on the call? You know, I think it's just been a lot of determination. I've always been one to kind of watch the trends in the marketplace, try to see where the market's going, and be in front of it instead of trying to catch up to it. And I sold REOs in the early 90s, a small fish in a very interesting little pond here in San Diego. There were just probably 5 or 6 major REO players back then, and I just had the little tidbits. And when I saw it coming again about 8 years ago, I sort of started getting poised and set up for it and really got in line and reestablished connections and made new connections. And I was just in the right place at the right time, and I've just kept that ball rolling. The marketplace is obviously changing now, and honestly, my biggest challenge right now is where to figure out to go from here.
Well, so setting aside the humility of the right place at the right time, though I do appreciate that being from Ohio, the fact is that you were in the right place at the right time, but you took the right actions, right? I mean, it wasn't just simply a function of, you just happened to walk down the street and pick up $1 million. You were thinking about what was happening next. You were kind of paying attention to the tea leaves because you'd been there, done that before in the early 90s, and you decided to take action again and kind of took a chance when nobody else was willing to, and you entered the REO market in your community before a lot of other realtors did. So make sure you give yourself plenty of credit for having done that. But then you said something else I really appreciate. You said basically trying to understand where the market's going next. So I realize that we're way off our script at this point, and I'll get back on in a second. But what do you think is going to happen next? And we can just, pay attention to your market. What do you predict is happening next? What moves do you think are the smart realtors should be taking now?
Well, obviously, investors are a huge portion of our marketplace. So if you're not taking advantage of investors, finding out how investors think, what their needs are, and trying to meet those needs, then you're missing the boat. I mean, there's a lot of buyers out there who have cash and are willing to buy these distressed properties. Of course, the short sale is here to stay. So if you're not training for the short sale, if you're not becoming certified, I'm a CDPE. That's an excellent course. There's lots of great courses out there. If you're not doing that and staying on top of how to service your short sales, you're really missing the boat. I think next year we're going to have so many short sales, and the process is going to get so much better that if you're not doing short sales, you're almost going to be out of business.
Well, that makes sense. And as far as the designations go, with regards to the short sales, we have a lot of agents with that designation that join Harris Real Estate University after they've gotten that designation, frankly, because a lot of people get their beaks wet, as it were. A lot of agents just kind of learn about the preliminary stuff and then really take it to the next level. And I'm sure that for you to be doing short sales personally, Chris, I mean, you had to essentially learn a lot of it after that designation. You had to really take it to the next level yourself. What types of things did you do to really build on that basis at education that you got after that, basically 2-day designation? What did you do after that to really take your short sale education to the next level? What did you do to really build your short sale business?
Well, that's a great question. I think that we all know that we can all be book smart, but in the real world, does it apply? I look back when I got my real estate license, and I don't know if I apply 5% of what we learned to take our test. So that being said, I really went to the experts and asked them for help and guidance. I mean, you'd be surprised that you learn these guidelines and they're general and you learn what to do, but in reality, in practice, you find out from the agents that are already doing it what all the little ins and outs are, the loopholes and the tricks of the trade are, and I think that that's big. So if I was brand new or just getting into short sales, I would try to find a short sale agent that's been doing it for years and take them to lunch, take them to dinner, pick their brain, take notes, see if they're willing to share any of the things that they've gathered over time, any checklists that they use, just any hints that'll help give you a leg up, because the short sale is tough, and if you're not making the right moves and you don't know the right play next, you could end up doing your client a disservice.
Well, exactly, and that's basically what we've personally found is that in the short sale arena, because the information changes so fast, it changes literally on a daily basis. The regulation, HARP 2.0 is going to throw a lot more, elements into the stew to try to have realtors figure out how to understand the complexities of the new requirements for HARP, and then the homeowner is going to be asking questions. And we were talking about this morning on our website, realestateinsidernews.com. The bottom line is, and Chris just said it, and I hope everyone else is listening now and on replay, and unfortunately or fortunately, this is going to be true for at least the next few years. A stagnant short sale, heck, a stagnant any kind of education is not going to work. If you think you're just basically going to sit down and take a class in your office, or you're going to have some attorney come in and talk to you about short sales, or you're going to, even attend a 2-day designation class, you think that's going to set you up to be ready to do short sales? I'm just going to be embrazened here, and I'm just going to put it out there. You're just wrong. You're not going to do it. You're not going to learn how to actually effectively work with sellers. You're hearing right now from one of the top realtors, let alone RE/MAX realtors in the world, and he's telling you what he would do. If he were getting in the business right now, what he would do is he'd focus in on agents that are already being successful with short sales, as an example. Chris, I 100% agree with you. 2012, we're going to see a massive increase in short sales, owners wanting to do them, but also banks willing to accept them. So if you are right now holding a designation out there, one of the many that are, basically sit in a classroom or watch videos for 2 days, and you realize that you need to advance your short sale education, Chris said great things. He said, pay attention to what other top producers are doing. But the other thing, Chris, and I'm sure you know this, is that's the reason that we have a coaching program around short sales. And, we do offer a designation, but the focus is the fact that this is an ongoing process and you have to be paying attention every single day. It kind of frustrates me, to be honest with you, how often I hear bad information being passed along, agents still believing that in California there's deficiency judgments, for example. In California specifically, guys, if you're not doing short sales, you're crazy. Everything in all the laws, all the tax laws, all the bank regulations, frankly, all the incentives that are being put out there right now for owners to do short sales, especially in California, make short sales an absolute no-brainer. Well, since we're on the topic, that's actually a good question, I think. When you're speaking with an owner about a short sale, Chris, what are you finding their top objections to be?
Top objections. It's not so much I get objections as they're just not sure how it's going to affect them moving down the line. How's it going to affect their world? As far as the actual transaction itself, I'm pretty good at explaining that. As far as the way the process is going to happen, they're not too concerned. It's more about just how it's going to affect their lives and how it's going to negatively affect their credit and any other repercussions they may have. And honestly, and maybe this is a RE/MAX thing, but we just have to really defer to outside help for that. I mean, we really push everybody towards talking to an attorney on how it's going to affect their position, talking to their CPA, how it's going to affect their taxes. I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is that we know just a little bit too much to be dangerous, and we start sharing information we think is helpful, but we've really, without knowing it, crossed the line and we started giving legal advice. And that's probably the biggest thing, is just making sure that they are talking to the right professionals other than yourself, who's going to facilitate the real estate transaction.
And if nothing else, what will happen is if you form an alliance with a good, say, for example, a good CPA, that CPA then can send business back to you, too, so it works two ways. And I think that's an excellent point, too, Chris. So the fact is that with a lot of people have more complex financial situations than others, you were seeing a lot of it's interesting, strategic defaults. Are you seeing more of those people that can't afford to make the payment but are just choosing not to?
I'm not personally seeing it, Tim, but I got to be honest with you, too. I am not going after short sale business, and I know that sounds crazy right now, but one of the things that is on my 2012 planner is to really increase the efforts to go after short sales. I mean, the short sales I'm getting mostly fall in my lap with past clients and referrals. So really, my goal is to get even more educated on the process and really bring in a top realtor to work with me to help facilitate the short sale process.
Well, so there you go. I mean, you're answering my question. So you're trying to say, think for yourself, where are the opportunities in 2012? Just like, you know, a handful of years ago, you were saying, okay, I realize the foreclosure opportunity is coming back. You're now saying your tea leaves are putting you towards short sales is what I'm hearing you say.
That's right. That's right. And one of the mistakes that I personally made in the last, 12, 14 months is got spoiled kind of with the REO process. And for those of you that don't do REOs just show up in your inbox, in your email, and here's your new assignment. Well, there were so many companies that were professing that that's the way the short sales were going to work, these top-down short sale assignments. I actually got sucked into that trap, and, because it was easy, and that's what I wanted to hear. And I would suggest that follow your coach, follow the prospecting, and don't rely on anything falling in your lap. Don't rely on any of these institutions that say they're going to promise you these short sales because they've got contracts with XYZ servicers. Go out there, hit your influence, your sphere of influence, hit your people, and, get short sales with people that you've cultivated, not that it's just been sent down to you in an email.
Well, I know that the RE/MAX convention last year in Vegas, they were talking, I forget what, I think it was Bank of America, and they're still, I think they honestly tried to make it so that there were quote-unquote direct assignment short sales. I don't think anyone intentionally misled agents out there about, RE/MAX specifically about trying to do direct assignments. But the reality of it was that the consumer's behavior didn't make that possible. That's what I think has surprised everyone. And that's the reason, Chris, and we can move to REOs here in a second, but that's the reason I think a lot of the banks now are offering incentives. I mean, it's very normal for an owner to be offered $5,000 to do a short sale. Bank of America right now, as I'm sure you know, Chris, they're proactively going after owners that have only missed 2 payments. So, in other words, they're receiving letters and phone calls and offers to do a short sale and cash incentives to do a short sale after only missing 2 payments because they know statistically that when someone misses a payment, well, 50% of the time that just might be a mistake. They were on vacation, the wire transfer didn't happen, the envelope stamp fell off. But 2 payments they know, and this is the crazy thing, that 90% of the time, it was like 92% of the time when someone's missed 2 payments, that loan's going to go into default. So Bank of America's realized that. A lot of the other major institutions are following suit. So opposed to waiting for these owners who are headed down the default path to live in their house for free for, I think it's the national average has been 632 days, opposed to waiting for that to happen, they're now proactively going after these guys early in the missing cycle. So there's going to be a sea change. It's a huge opportunity, no doubt. But at the same time, you're certainly not walking away from REOs. REOs have definitely been very good to you, correct?
Yeah, no, REOs are definitely an area that I'm still very excited about. I've always enjoyed working with investors and institutional type clients. So no, REOs are definitely a high area of concentration for me.
Well, so let's go back to when you were realizing that the REO distress into the business was going to be a huge opportunity. Now, it's changed now, I imagine. Well, let me change my question. If you were a new agent right now and you were wanting to get into REOs and you're not in San Diego County, so you don't have to worry about this person being a competitor of yours, that's a joke, right? What would you do?
What would I do?
They're in South Dakota, so you don't have to worry about telling them what to do.
Yeah, no problem. I don't really. I mean, yeah, we have competitors, but everybody does things differently, so
yep.
I don't worry too much about that. I think the first thing is don't listen to anybody that says you can't get an REO. That's absolutely 100% wrong. This is an ever-changing, ever-dynamic market. It is still a people business, just like any other sales business. And if you can get yourself out there, if you have the ability and the resources to go to these conferences, meet the people, be prepared when you go, know who's going to be there, try to figure out who they are. I mean, honestly, if it were me, well, and this is what I did, I actually reached out to REO agents that were not in my marketplace, and I just cold called them, and I asked them all kinds of questions, and I got everything from a half-hour tutorial on what they've done, including passing along client contact information to hang-ups. So, we have tough skin as realtors. You can't be afraid of the rejection. But I would absolutely, I'd reach out to realtors out of the area, pick their brains, see if they'll share with you There's a lot you can find on the internet. I would definitely be educated on the process. If you don't know how to do an REO, make sure you understand it, because you have to be able to talk their talk. And if they think you don't know what you're talking about, you're going to have some problems.
Let me jump in there, Chris.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you don't realize how important some of the things you're saying. You're just saying them conversationally, but I'm thinking about the average agent out there who's trying to learn and take notes from what you're saying. And you just said something that's so important that so many people just basically take for granted. You need to learn the parlance of how REO people talk. You need to learn that they never say listing, they say asset. You need to learn how to speak and sound like they do. Otherwise, literally, when you get one of these asset managers on the phone and you're sounding like an ill-informed, inexperienced agent, why would they give you an asset? Why would they take a risk on you, especially if you're new in the space? They won't. So Chris just said it. Get an education. Absolutely, positively learn everything that there is for you to learn so that when you do get that opportunity, you don't fumble it. Chris, what's the best thing about we can grind out about some of the negative things about selling real estate in this market, whether it be short sales or REOs or any other kind of listing. But from your experience being an REO agent, what's the best aspects, or what are the best aspects from being an REO listing agent?
The best, you mean, would you say perks, you mean?
Yeah, call them what you will. Call them what you will, because people always talk about, well, sometimes you get the asset and it's in bad condition, and sometimes the banks pay late on their reimbursements, and, you deal with an asset manager and they're having a bad day. You get those calls in the middle of the night about some, water leak if you're in the Midwest. Who knows? There's always those stories. But no one talks about the good things about being an asset listing agent. What are the advantages, the perks, as you say?
Well, advantages, of course, are you're not dealing with emotion. You're not having to go out at 7 o'clock at night and do listing presentations. You're not having to, really wonder where your next paycheck's coming from, because you do have a steady flow of business. Now, granted, it's much lower than it was even a year and a half ago, but that's a real great perk. And also, you have a known factor. All of these clients have scorecard metrics. In advance what you have to do to succeed with these people. That is a fantastic thing to know. So as long as you follow their guidelines and you meet their expectations, and we shoot to exceed their expectations, and the real important part is make sure that you reinforce that when you're done with the transaction, and make sure that they note your file, and make sure that don't be afraid to ask them to share their experience with their coworkers who are sitting around you, who could be the one to give you the next asset. That's exciting stuff. And you're going to have bad transactions too. There's nothing you can do about it. But these good transactions are so exciting, and you just want to push yourself. You have to sell yourself every day.
Well, talk about the scorecard thing. I was taking notes because I wanted to ask you more questions about this. These are all the things we talk about at HREU. But the scorecard thing you mentioned first really is the most important thing. And I think the reason you mentioned it first, Chris, is because the scorecard that the asset managers keep on you, basically, the grade card, different people call it different things, is in essence the same way that they themselves inside the asset management company are also scored. So you're being scored simultaneously as they're being scored. They're being scored on your results, and obviously you're being scored on your own results. So what are the few little, what are the matrix? What are the points? What are the different areas that an agent is being scored on? And why is it important that an agent understands how this system works?
Well, every one of the clients has different metrics, but some of the main ones that are real important to them are, of course, sales price to BPO. If you can't value a property, then you might as well not even be in the business, because that's why they're coming to you as a local expert. And the clients are getting tighter and tighter on making sure that the agent is in the local market. Chase, for example, requires that the listing agent his office is within 5 miles of the property. So being able to be spot on your value is very important. That means you got to be able to analyze your comps. You got to be able to determine the value and make your adjustments, almost like an appraiser. But you also have to understand what the marketplace has. Is there a shortage of that type of product in the market? So even though the comps say it's worth $100,000, if there's a shortage in that marketplace and sales are hot right now, you may have to value that property at 108 or 110. So they're looking for your local expertise. So sales price to BPO is huge. Days in inventory is another big one, or days on market. They're kind of tied together. Days in inventory is the number of days from the time that property becomes my assignment until the time that property closes escrow. And that could mean an elongated eviction, or it could mean an empty property we just rehabbed and got out of there. And then, of course, once we get it on the market, how quickly can we get it sold from the list date to the actual close date? Those are probably some of the most important ones that I find that my asset managers really key in on.
And there's, of course, other different asset management companies, like you said, Chris, that are going to be valuing on contract rollover, failed contracts, contracts, that don't close. That works against you. And, another thing that's interesting, and you touched on this when you said it's a people business, it's a relationship business, because it really is. If you don't have a good relationship, or if you're just frankly somebody the asset managers don't want to work with, even if you do have a good score, what a lot of agents don't know is they talk about you in the notes in the major portals. Let's use Resident as an example. They'll actually put notes in there about you, and the other asset managers inside that same company can read those notes. And if you're not necessarily easy to deal with, or if you're delegating too much, and if they feel whatever it is, they're definitely going to, steer away from using you in the future, even if you do have a great score. I've seen that happen to a couple of the major listing agents for REOs in the country, because they got too big for the britches, basically, and the asset management managers specifically felt like they were being neglected. So anything else you can think of, any other tips and tricks that agents should know about when they're wanting to become an REO listing agent? We talked about scoring. We talked about anything else that comes to mind just off the top of your head?
Well, just that topic you hit is really big. You got to drop the attitudes. These people are the ones that are controlling your assignment. Remember I said this is real great to see assignments show up in your inbox? But you have to understand, you have to do it their way. You have to be diplomatic. That's another big thing in this. We're independent business people. It's hard. It's a hard adjustment to go from running your own operation, having no one else really get in the way. Escrow does what you want them to do. Title does what you want them to do. Well, it's a different world in REO. You don't control escrow. You don't control title. Of the last couple of years, you don't even get to choose your own contractors for the most part. You're dealing with nationwide field services companies. And I'm telling you, they are a challenge. And so how you handle those challenges is a serious part of the way that you will be looked at. If you can't work with these people diplomatically, if you can't get them to move and finish their jobs, do what they're supposed to do, escalate things the appropriate way, you are going to be the one that is cut. They're not going to cut these field services companies or these escrow companies. They're going to say, you know what, we don't need you. You're too difficult. We'll move on to the next agent. So that's a real big one.
And that's what they say too. I mean, literally, they'll just basically they'll pan you as being difficult or not cooperative. And Chris, it's funny you said it the way you did. Agents do have a mentality of being independent contractors. And if you've been selling real estate for any amount of time, you have been spoiled because everyone basically kisses your butt. All the ancillary service providers are working in the traditional real estate environment because of you. The loan officer's getting a loan because of you. If you go down the litany of people that are getting paid as a result of the transaction you created, all those people are used to kissing your butt, bringing you presents, sending you, a box of cookies at Christmas and the rest of it. In this world, when you're dealing with the banks, it's just the opposite. You have to think of yourself as a cog in their wheel opposed to them being a cog in your wheel. You're just part of the process. You are not controlling the process. So the biggest challenge, and I do agree, and this is where a lot of issues come up with agents that are working with banks, even on the short sale side, is that you have to think of yourself, and this is hard to even say, but it's true, as an employee. You have to approach working with these banks as if they were your boss. And some of you haven't worked for somebody in so long, if ever. So that's kind of a foreign concept for you, and that's going to be a big challenge. Let's just be honest. But if you can wrap your mind around what it's like to be accountable to somebody else, that's really what being an REO listing agent's all about. It's accountability, constant accountability.
Yeah, and Tim, the other thing that really stands out in my mind is your ability to get transactions closed once you enter them, and that is a real big thing. A lot of agents may not put as much attention to the upfront details of examining a potential transaction before they get into it and seeing down the line what some of the pitfalls and problems might be. Well, you've got to become an expert at that, because there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into opening a real estate transaction. First of all, the negotiation process and all the paperwork, the bank addendums, all that. It's a lot of work. A lot of wheels have to go in motion. A lot of things happen. A lot of costs get incurred on the seller side. So for those transactions to not close, that reflects very poorly on you. So a high closing ratio for the transactions that you actually open is imperative. And that's one thing that I drive home with my office every single day is we have to keep our eyes open and look down the path. Can you see a light way down there at the end of the tunnel that might be coming at you to run you over? And if so, let's deal with it now. Let's head it off at the path. And if we do see that there's going to be a deal killing issue, let's get it over with now, put it on the table, and move on.
Well, that comes from your experience. I mean, let's just be honest here. That comes from you having been so successful for as long as you have. But we're going back to that previous point, and it is really important. Contract fail rate, they call it different things, but if you submit a contract and the asset manager then takes it to their boss and the boss takes it to the investor and they all do their negotiating and they're talking and all of a sudden the contract fails just because you didn't necessarily collect all the preliminary financing documents on your buyer or on the buyer from the co-op. Maybe the buyer from the co-op wasn't even, didn't have the cash that they said they had to close. That actually is going to bite you in the butt, and it doesn't take too many times for that to happen before all of a sudden those emails stop coming in. The dreaded word. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, the other big thing too is they expect you to do your homework. Again, going back to the theme of being an expert in your local marketplace. Understand that there's condo projects perhaps that won't take certain types of financing. Don't get yourself caught in entertaining a VA offer on a project that's not VA approved, and you don't even find that out or do any work on that until 40 days into the transaction. You look pretty bad going back to your asset manager and trying to explain why this blew up because it was a VA transaction. Or are there any other restrictions perhaps that the HOA has on the property? For example, maybe they don't allow investors to purchase in there, or they have a restriction that the property can't be resold in 12 months, but the buyer plans on flipping it. You run into those things. If you don't address those up front because you're not paying attention, you're going to have real problems, and it's real hard to back out of those things once you've gone down that path.
Well, and so there's another thing. You mentioned the financing issue with VA as your example, but the FHA, I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe it was the FHFA, I forget who it was, but one of the, essentially the mortgage governmental GSE type entities came out and said that they're raising the requirements for what is a healthy HOA. And one of the things they're doing is they're raising the amount of money that the HOAs have to have on reserve. And Chris just mentioned that, in this description of other issues, but the fact is that the condo associate, if the person's planning on getting financing or hoping to get financing, and the condo association doesn't meet the requirements of the GSEs, there's no financing. And so there's literally a list of condo associations that are unfinanceable if the buyer is trying to get GSE-backed financing. So that's something a lot of people don't understand. And, Chris, you're also kind of going down an interesting road here. You have to be really spot on and having really good third-party service providers, loan officers, inspectors, home improvement guys, all that. That team, that had to have been a challenge to put together, correct?
Well, it is. And as far as HOAs go, I felt that was such an important issue. I actually have a staffer that is dedicated strictly towards negotiating financial relocation assistance, also known as cash for keys, and investigating HOAs. That is their sole job. And that keeps me out of hot water moving forward to make sure that we are presenting these properties appropriately to the marketplace and making them available to all financing that's available and making sure that we're aware that the financing that is not available.
What are you finding as far as you're in a major market, obviously, and I think San Diego County probably and maybe Las Vegas and Phoenix are probably some of the top markets in the country to get an indication of what's happening next for the national market, if there is such a thing. But what are you seeing happening as far as condo associations? They fallen like rocks in terms of ones that are able to get FHA financing?
Yeah, they're having real trouble, and it's mostly from the inside out. And what I mean by that is just so many people are going delinquent on their HOA dues. I think it's if more than 15% of the homeowners are more than 30 days delinquent on their HOA dues, that knocks it out of the box for financing. And that I'm finding as an increasing problem in the condo projects. The FHA, I'm seeing more and more expire on the FHA approval list. And I've just had 2 transactions, believe it or not, expire FHA in the middle of the transaction. There's no way to know when it's going to expire. All of a sudden it just shows up on the expire list. Fortunately, in both of those transactions, we were able to convert the buyer to additional financing that was available. I think one of them was HomePath, and I think the other one ended up going conventional. But we were able to go ahead and save those transactions. But you just have to be aware of this stuff, and dropping off the list in the middle of the transaction is not something you can be aware of. You just have to be able to handle it from there.
And that's all important stuff, and really, guys, if you're wanting to learn more about this, what we always suggest people do is find your most qualified, your biggest rock star FHA, VA lender in your community, and not like 5 or 6 years ago where they're constantly trying to take you out to lunch. You take them out to lunch. You become their best friend. You learn about all the special programs. Chris mentioned HomePath. There's going to be other little community housing things that come out that you might not be aware of. I mean, sometimes there's special incentives, grants, down payment grants, things like that happen. But if you're not really dialed into the reality of the different options for financing, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those. But really the main thing is when it comes to financing, get real familiar with the basic requirements and then have a really great loan officer in your back pocket. And one of the things, Chris, and I'm sure you do this too, that we always have our coaching clients do is you're a listing agent on an REO, you get an offer in, and the buyer is supposedly going to try to get some sort of GSE-type financing. We always suggest to our coaching clients that they then require, as strongly as they can, that co-op's buyer get pre-qualified by this other lender, assuming that you weren't comfortable with the lender that the buyer brought with. That's just one of the things you can do to cover your butt, because remember Chris's point, that contract fails, it counts against you. Chris, this is a California thing more than it is anything else, but a lot of agents are so used to putting things in contract and having them fall out. They think that's normal, that they're going to go through all the effort of putting something in contract and having it fall out. They don't know how to actually fight to keep it together. Are you finding that that's becoming more of a challenge, especially on the REO side, as all the other the complexities enter into some of these distressed sales? Are you finding keeping the transactions together is a challenge, and how do you do it? We have some checklists that we go through to try to keep these transactions together. We have a questionnaire that we ask the buyer's agent before we go into a transaction. We also have a questionnaire we ask the loan officer before we go into a transaction. And if there's any red flags on those, we escalate it and we start digging some more. So it's real important. I think one of the things going on in this marketplace is it has become so challenging that I think that people are operating a little bit on a wing and a prayer sometimes. When they've got a buyer that wants to buy a property, I think sometimes people are sort of overlooking some of the signs in their own transaction that this might blow up in the hopes that it's going to close because they really want that transaction to close. And unfortunately, overlooking problems that are right in front of you, things that your client says or has said in the past, 90% of the time is going to come back to bite you. Give us an example. That you seem to have something in mind as you were saying what you just said, and it seems like give us an example of something maybe you've experienced recently.
You have a buyer, you're walking through a property, and they make some comments about the condition of the property, but the property is very attractive. Perhaps the price is attractive, but really these buyers aren't the type that can take on any sort of work. They have no experience in that. They don't have a contractor friend. And they're really just quite afraid of what they don't know, maybe what's hidden behind those walls. And so they move forward with the transaction, and in the middle of it they realize this is just not the type of property they should have bought. All the signs were there. When the agent initially interviewed them, they didn't want a fixer in the first place. And they just sort of ignored all that with the excitement about a property that they were interested in, moved forward, and it just ends up blowing up.
Yep, that definitely is. That's a just listening to your client and giving them and servicing them with the listing information that they actually want. And again, a lot of this goes back to how well you pre-qualify your buyers, like Chris just said during the interview. So those are really good points. Now, you obviously work with a lot of investors. Something that we were talking about at HREU, really the past few months, is the incredible number of foreign investors that have entered into the market. Canadians probably leading the way. In Florida, we're seeing a lot of Brazilians. Chinese in California are seemingly looking for, and it's interesting, Chris, I don't know if you're seeing this, but in different parts of the country, these foreign investors, they aren't buying to rent or buying to flip, they're buying to live in. They're almost establishing a plan B if they have to move out of their countries. And there's new communities that I see forming in California, for example, where it's like a bunch of Chinese expatriates and things of that nature. What are you seeing in your market?
I'm not so much seeing the establishment of these sort of sub-communities, but I am seeing a lot of foreign people purchasing these properties, and I don't know if it's because they are concerned where their money is in their country, that perhaps it's not as secure as they'd like it to be. They want to diversify. But they definitely are coming with cash, and they are pretty motivated to buy. Usually if I've got a property in an area that might be more suited to their taste, they tend to step up and pay what needs to be paid to buy these properties.
So investors that are looking to rent, what are they looking for? What are their primary concerns? Long-term buy and hold types.
The ones that want to rent them out, their main concern, I think, is that they've got a property that is going to be the most appealing in the rental marketplace. The real savvy investors are the ones that are making sure they buy properties that have the right bedroom and bath count for the area. If you're in a college area, you're probably not wanting to purchase a one-bedroom or a studio because college kids tend to like to live together, and they want 3- and 4-bedroom type houses. So if that's your target, you need to be looking at that. If it's in an area that perhaps a lot of the people don't drive, then they need to make sure they're in an area that has a lot of public transportation, and the people have easy access to the public transportation. Security is a big one too. A lot of these people want to make sure that they're living in a place that they feel secure. Even though they don't own it, the renters want to know that they're going to be safe. So the landlords that are purchasing these properties make sure that they buy properties where people can feel secure.
Yeah, those are seemingly the good old-fashioned reasons why people buy any kind of real estate. With REOs, with as many homes as you've sold, and you've sold thousands of homes, would you say that there's been a shift in mindset about home ownership? Have you seen that? Have you seen you're dealing with a lot of investors and you're dealing with a lot of distressed properties, so maybe your mindset's a little bit colored, but are you seeing even in an area as wonderful as San Diego County, are you seeing a shift in the mindset about home ownership on a whole?
Yeah, I definitely think that people are not looking at home ownership as something they have to do. You grow up, you have to go to school, you're pressured to go to college, you're pressured to do these certain things by your peers and your family, and one of them always seems to be shooting for having that home and the perfect little family, that type of thing. But the home is becoming less and less important, and I think that the younger people are more excited about being light on their feet and being able to move where they want to, especially in a marketplace too where they're not sure about their jobs. There's been a lot of people who I've come in contact with who have considered buying, but one of their main reasons is they don't know how their job's going to pan out and what their stability is like. And if they have to move, they don't want to be stuck with being upside down on a mortgage and having to rent the property out.
So it does make sense that if you're selling real estate in this market that you get real used to dealing with folks that are looking to buy investment properties because a lot of savvy investors out there are realizing that the housing or the ownership, I like the way you said it better than what I was about to say, but it's like a rite of passage to being an adult in America. It used to be all the things that Chris rattled off, and now they're changing. And who knows if it's a permanent change or not, but there definitely is a shift towards, it used to be if you were a renter and you were living in a community of owners, you were somehow less than. It was palatable, especially if you're an old bird like Chris and I can tell that we're about the same age, Chris. And, because, the funny thing is, Chris, is when I'm talking to people that are younger than you and I by like maybe 15 years, they don't have the same hang-ups as we do. They don't have the same mindset issues as we do. You and I have more programming that really came from the 60s and the 70s as far as what we think and how we think, but they don't. They're just like you just said. They want to be more flexible. They don't want to have to be tied to a particular geographic area. It's amazing how many big shifts are happening really in the economy, but also in housing. And it really comes back to the fact that you got to know your market. You have to know why people are buying. You have to know and understand and don't fight with the trends. And Chris, has that been a challenge for you, kind of switching your mindset from the way people that don't know San Diego County have no idea how hot it was in the bubble. It was crazy. I mean, homes in San Diego County in some places have fallen just as bad as in Vegas, 60, 70%. People in San Diego, they were buying not just 1, 2, 3 houses, they were buying 4 and 5 houses because real estate was going up so fast. It was one of the craziest markets in the country, and now it's just the opposite. What effect has that had on you?
Well, I think that people are more looking at the serious value proposition when they buy a home. They're being a lot more particular. They are not feeling the pressure that they've got to get this property quick before somebody else buys it. So they're just being much more discerning in their decisions to purchase property, making sure it's right for them, right for their family. And one of the biggest things we encourage buyers to do is make sure they're comfortable with the area that they're looking in. Don't get so focused on the individual house itself, because you're going to be saddled with your neighbors and kind of what all's around that home. And if that's not really your style, if these aren't maybe people you're feeling comfortable associating with for whatever reason, you're not going to enjoy your house no matter how wonderful the house itself is. So that's a real big thing to me, and I think that's probably one of the number one favors any real estate agent can do is make sure the buyers really do their homework up front. I mean, you can only provide so much data. They have to go drive the neighborhoods. They have to feel comfortable. They have to knock on the neighbors' doors before they close on a house and see who's living there. They have to be comfortable.
So you mentioned earlier that you've seen the number of, and we're getting some great questions in, guys, and just a reminder, sorry for not mentioning this before, as we come to a close of this great interview, if you guys have any questions, make sure you put them into the webinar, and I'll ask Chris most of your questions, not all of them, but most of them. So you mentioned the fact that you were seeing a slowdown in assets, and of course that happened as a result of the robo-signing foreclosure gate. You can think of all the other little colorful names for all the legal schmaggles that happened. Sean O'Toole from Foreclosure Radar came out with a great article yesterday and said despite people's hoping that all those legal issues with regards to foreclosures, a lot of people were actually under the belief that somehow that would mean they'd get houses for free because the banks couldn't find their forms. Well, sure enough, the courts have, frankly, move forward with foreclosures, and we're starting to hear from all the top asset management companies, as I'm sure you have, that they're anticipating, though they don't quite know when, they're anticipating an increase in foreclosure activity, which obviously will result in an increase in the number of REO listings. So going forward in 2012, do you have any sort of, 2012, 2013, 2014, really, do you have any other predictions with regards to the number of REOs that are going to be hitting the market? And really, how are you preparing for that? Well,
I certainly they're expected the market to pick up. The flow of foreclosures is supposed to increase. But honestly, we've been hearing that for 2.5 years now. So it's really one of those I'll believe it when I see it. That being said, I think just making yourself stand out more. One of the biggest things for us is as the marketplace has tightened, there's more agents that are doing REOs. There's less REOs, so the pie has gotten smaller. You've got to stand out. You've got to make sure that you are exceeding the service level requirements of your clients, and that's something I emphasize with my staff every single day. Okay, we constantly have to sell ourselves. So if we just do a good job, that's great. But make sure that you're somehow communicating that we're doing that good job with the client without just bragging. And you can do that easily when you're in your daily communications. It can be very subtle. So standing out, also broadening your services. There's big talk these days about property management. If property management is something you're familiar with, or your office does or allows, reach out to these people. That might be a way in to some of these clients and say, look, I do property management. I know that there's talk about going that way. Short sales.
Chris, let me interrupt you on the property management thing.
Yeah.
People are talking about that in the REO asset distress space, right? But the rest of the real estate community, the other million of us out there, they have no idea what you're talking about. But I think it's really, if you don't mind, Chris, what do you know about what's happening with guys? What he's talking about is the GSEs have made comments publicly that they're adding another level of analysis to every asset that they have to determine whether or not they should turn them into rentals. Now, I know in Florida they were testing that out, trying to rent their, Fannie Mae, I think, was trying to rent some of their assets. But what people seem to be in the belief of is that because there's so many of these distressed properties that are not just currently for sale, but coming for sale, that at some point, politically speaking, it's going to make more sense because they don't want to flood the market with these, REOs and drive prices down, that they're going to have to work out some kind of hybrid rental program. Chris, have you heard any details? I've heard different rumblings, but I'm curious to what you've heard.
Honestly, anything I would say would just be speculation at this point. The reason I say property management is it's not just an REO thing, too. We are in a marketplace where there are a lot of people right now that have to move for whatever reason, and maybe they don't want to short sell their home. Maybe they want to come back sometime. So there's a big need out there for those people who might just be your clients right now to have somebody like you take care of their property while they're gone. Make sure you choose the right renter. So you may have 10 clients, past clients right now that you could cultivate, and you could manage their property for them while they're gone in the hopes of returning to San Diego. So it doesn't even have to involve REO. But this is just another way for you in a tough time to create additional revenue streams for yourself.
Well, so like, for example, and you touched on a really great point. In, for example, a lot of the really expensive areas, those people don't have to sell. Those people, don't want to take a loss. And we're seeing what happens a lot of times is they're realizing that if they don't have to take the loss, if they owe more than it's worth, or maybe they own it outright, they just don't want to sell it for less than they paid, they're making those into rental properties. And you go to any of the most expensive areas in the country, like you go to La Jolla and Chris's Market or wherever else the areas are where homes are, routinely in the low seven figures on up, those guys, for the most part, you're not seeing, in the real luxury areas, you're not seeing a huge increase in distress because they're financially well off enough that they're turning those into rentals. Now, in the McMansion areas where homes have been selling for $1 million plus in, say, Atlanta and some of the other areas around the country, those areas are turning into foreclosure villas. So, you just have to know your market, to Chris's point earlier. Chris also was about to mention, sorry for interrupting you, short sales. Short sales are without a doubt going to be a huge opportunity in 2012 and 2014. And I'll say this again, especially in California. Now, California's got some really advantageous laws with regards to owners doing short sales, but there's no reason to believe that those laws won't change in your state as well. But the bottom line is you got to know what the ramifications are. I really appreciate the fact that Chris said align yourself so you can refer your clients to a really good, maybe an attorney and a CPA. If for no other reason, it's going to make it so that you feel more comfortable knowing that that owner has had all the correct information from someone who's licensed to give that type of information. Chris, that can't be said enough, the importance of not wearing too many hats, especially those who aren't licensed to wear, right? Right. And I really appreciate, the other side of that is you can get business from those guys. They'll refer to you business. Guys, nothing is static. That's one thing I heard from Chris during this whole interview. Nothing is static. You got to be keeping yourself, and that's really what I think Chris said really at the start of this interview, is you got to keep yourself on the leading edge of what's happening in the real estate industry. If you think you can basically get some education and basically kick back and think that education is going to last for you, it just doesn't. And it's unfortunate, I'll give you that, because you do have to almost set aside time every single day if you're going to be successful, if you're even going to survive, to learn what's happening different in financing, right? Financing rules are changing. And if you don't keep yourself abreast of those, you're not going to survive. You've got to know what's happening in your market value. You have to be literally every single day paying attention to what your absorption rate is, the days in the market in your community, what's selling, what's not. You know, Chris brought up some great topics about condo associations that are now falling off the FHA financing list. So you put a buyer in a contract on a FHA condo that you've spent the last 10 years trying to find for them, and then they can't get financing because the association's off the list. One of you asked, how do you know what condo associations are approved? Go find a really good FHA, VA lender, and then align yourself with them, and they'll tell you. They have a list. We talked about the importance of really knowing the short sale into things backwards and forwards. And a lot of you have, or, you've had some level of short sale training. Maybe you've got an existing designation. But I'm here to tell you, and Chris said it as well, that's not enough. You've got to take it to the next level. And Chris, you wouldn't know this because you're not looking at their screen. Guys, I've included a link on the screen on this interview that you're listening to right now, which is a replay of a 90-minute, very intense short sale training call we've done yesterday. So make sure you go and listen to that. And that is really exposing you to all the different changes that are happening with short sales in 2012. And don't stop there. You've got to take it to the next level. So I'm going to say this again. If you've gotten a designation 2 or 3 years ago, great. But why aren't you doing more short sales? It's because everything has changed, and refamiliarize yourself with the process. Start by listening to that free 90-minute interview. It doesn't cost you anything, obviously, and it'll at least get you motivated to take it to the next level. And this is the perfect time of year to actually be refocusing on what you need to know. So, Chris, some other interesting questions that were coming in. Agents have a love-hate relationship with BPOs, many of them, as you know. BPOs, still something that you have to do at your level?
We only do BPOs for our existing REO clients. They have requirements for updated BPOs, or obviously a BPO when we initially get the assignment, but we don't do BPOs as a general rule.
Okay, so as far as if you were to get started in wanting to list REOs again, your mindset about doing BPOs for companies probably would have to be different, wouldn't it?
Honestly, I don't know. I think BPOs are probably some good training to help you. But for me personally, doing a BPO has never directly led to me getting an REO.
So for your experience level, because you've been in the space long enough, has probably superseded your needing to do a bunch of BPOs, is what you're saying.
Right. I don't need to do the BPOs. Okay.
Well, that's a nice luxury for you. Someone asked a great question about how to avoid reassignments. Are any tips or suggestions on that? Maybe start out with what a reassignment is.
Well, reassignment, of course, is your asset manager who you're working with has felt that you did not meet the requirements to hang on to that property and see it to the successful sale, and that may be time requirements. A lot of the asset management firms have strict requirements. If you don't have, say, offers in 90 days, or you haven't had some activity in 90 days, then they may automatically reassign it. But most of the time, it's really regarding your communication, making sure you're staying in touch with that asset manager, you're doing your monthly reports, you're staying on top of the marketplace. If there's adjustments, you need to let them know about it. Don't get an REO and then 90 days later say, hey, we're overpriced. Or even worse, don't say the property is worth $100,000 and then 2 weeks later say, oh, no, actually it's worth 80. I mean, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. That circles back to the whole, you're the local area expert, and 90% of your job is getting that BPO value right. So you said something, and we just had a great question. Actually, there's 3 questions that came in that are all sort of circling around the same issue. You said it's absolutely not too late to become an REO listing agent. You said there is tons of opportunity in the marketplace for agents to learn how to become REOs. But that, of course, means, and guys, if you're listening to this whole interview and thinking about what Chris was saying, that means that existing REO agents are going to lose their assets. Existing REO agents are going to fall from graces with these asset management companies, and they're going to look for replacements. And I hope you also were paying attention to what Chris said. The way you win in this business when you're working with the banks, especially as an asset listing agent, in a lot of ways it's the same, but in a lot of ways it's different. It starts with your mindset
of essentially realizing that when you're working for an asset management company, you got to think of yourself as a bit of an employee. Chris, as we went through this, are there any other things that popped into your mind? I mean, you were the one that said it, so I think clearly and correctly and truthfully, honestly, because I find a lot that existing REO listing agents will try to say the opposite, that all the relationships are locked up because obviously they're trying to protect their own turf, and you didn't say that, which I really appreciate. Anything else come to mind, like when you go to these conferences and you talk to these asset managers, any other aspects or characteristics they're looking for in new REO listing agents?
Well, again, back to a people business. Make sure you're talking to people in the business, at the servicer level that can help you or point you in the right direction. And pay attention to them. It's not all about you. Ask them questions. Be interested. Find out what's important to them. And then get permission to follow up with them. Very rarely at these conferences or wherever you go, classes and such, are you going to get somebody say, yeah, I definitely need a new REO agent, call me Monday and I'll hook you up. That doesn't usually happen. But get permission to follow up with them. Make sure you pay attention to something that will make them remember you. So when you follow up with them in a week or so and maybe they talked about their kids' soccer. I mean, really, it is that simple. Or they talked about something that was real important to them in the disposition of REO assets, like they really key in on days on market. If that's something real important to them, make sure you remember that. So when you contact them, you can discuss, the pros and cons or the benefits of working with you and how short your days on market are. Whatever the case may be, but you have to look for every little crevice, every little crack that you can squeeze into.
That's interesting what you said. So when you're calling them, take notes, pay attention, you're trying to, Chris, the most important thing that I really would like to underline 1,000 times in people's minds is you have to call being of service. You're not calling these guys, these asset managers, and you're listening to right now, guys, Chris is the #1 REO listing agent for RE/MAX in 2009. Now he's one of the top agents, not just in the country with RE/MAX, but in the world. And he said something that, frankly, all of you basically better tattoo on your cerebral cortexes, and that's focusing on being of service. What are you here to give? How can you help those asset managers? What can you be doing specifically to make their lives easier? Chris, can you give us some sample things of things that you've said in the past, these asset managers, that you know that they, frankly, need help with? Some maybe tips and suggestions when an agent's, because a lot of agents are afraid to make those phone calls, afraid to make those contacts. What is it that an asset manager really needs help with?
It really is individualized. I mean, it's really, I can't give you a specific because it's really important to customize that situation to the individual. So I think the main thing is understand, before you go out there, understand the business, understand how the REO process works so you can speak intelligently to them. Because if you can't speak intelligently to them about their business, then they're not going to engage you, and therefore you're not going to have the ability to even pick up any tidbits where you can squeeze your way into their world. So understand, engage them, ask them questions that are important to them. Ask them about what they look for in an REO agent. I mean, simple, basic questions. This is sales, What is it that you need? What are your needs in your different markets? You can even take another angle. Where are you looking for REO agents? They're always looking for agents that may just not be in your backyard. So if they're looking for agents in Savannah, Georgia, maybe you know a good friend over there that's in Savannah, Georgia that's a great agent that might appreciate that introduction. That might be your in. Just say, hey, I've got a great agent. He's top agent in Savannah. I know he's done some REO. Do you mind if I connect you with him? Oh, sure, no problem. Here's my email. Give me a shout, and let's connect next week. Well, there's your crack.
Yeah, we got a list of, but that's a really great point. Even if you're not directly getting assets from that, and no agents out there listening, do not try to weasel in on that relationship and collect a referral fee, because I know some of you are thinking that. Just make the connection, because as Chris is alluding, you're doing a service for that asset manager, and they will reciprocate. Pay attention to, guys, go back and listen to this interview again. He said a couple other things that I didn't emphasize, but really important. You're calling an asset management company today. The asset manager may or may not have assets in your particular area, but that does not mean literally, Chris, I'm sure you've been at these asset manager offices, and Julie and I go to them frequently. imagine a big, huge, usually, one-floor space with a sea of cubicles. So in that sea of cubicles, sometimes depending on how big they are, they'll be divided up into teams or regions of the country. Literally, the agent or the asset manager you're speaking with who lists stuff in your particular market, they might not have anything on their desk that they can assign to you, but literally the asset manager that's, a foot from them does. And if you don't ask, you're not going to get. But if you just call up and say, I'm, Susie Superstar, and I've been listing and selling real estate forever, and I have all these designations of words, and here's a picture of me and my dog, do business with me, it's not going to work. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for professionals. They're looking for people that, frankly, are going to make their lives easier. You guys have to envision you're an asset manager. You're sitting in a nondescript office in a nondescript cubicle, and you're sitting there being monitored basically the whole day. That's really how it works, and you're being scored, and it's a very high pressure, depending on how many assets you have, job. It just is. If I am an asset manager at one of these big asset management companies, and like 10 people ask what your favorite asset management companies are, you can decide to answer that if you want to or not, Chris. But I'm looking for agents like Chris who are going to make my life easier. Chris isn't calling me up to nag me. He isn't bringing me problems. Chris is bringing me solutions. He might tell me, okay, there was a problem with this happened at this particular asset. This is what I did. The problem's fixed. That's what he's doing. He's letting him know that there was a problem, but the problem's been fixed. If you're someone that's just going to bring problems and wait for them to tell you what the solution is, they're not going to want to work with you. So you have to be thinking of it from the asset manager's perspective. It's not always the asset manager that assigns. Sometimes it's the portfolio manager or whatever else. But still, at the end of the day, it's the asset managers that have to like you or not. And if you're the guy that's solving problems for them and making their lives easier, they're, of course, going to want to use you again and, of course, refer other people to you. Chris, does that spark some thoughts?
No, absolutely. One of the big things is you never know who you're sitting next to at a conference or at an educational training. Talk to the people around you. Ask who they are, why they're there, what do they do. I got into Premier Asset Services probably 6 years ago or so when they were closed. I mean, they were not accepting any agents in California. And this goes to my point of you can still get REO. Granted, this was before the big wave came, but they were absolutely closed. Southern California was impacted with agents. I started talking to the gentleman next to me. Well, he just happened to be the head of the valuations department for Premier Asset Services, and we hit it off, and he asked me lots of questions. I asked him lots of questions, and at the end of it all, he said, well, let me see what I can do. Would you be interested in working with us? And of course I said yes. So if I hadn't have opened my mouth and started talking to this gentleman next to me, I would have never had this fantastic account that has brought me quite a bit of business over the last 5 years.
And so, guys, what I'm hearing from Chris is there is absolutely no sense of entitlement. I'm hearing absolutely no complacency. I'm hearing Chris say that he's always looking and he's always thinking and he's paying attention, but his primary driver is obviously building his business and making money, but his primary driver is being of service to others. Now, guys are confused about that. Being of service to others, what then follows is profit. Chris was having a conversation where he was sincerely hoping to learn from the LPS fellow sitting next to him. He was sincerely, I think you said LPS. No, you didn't.
Yeah.
You said Premier Asset. Oh, you did. Okay, yeah. He was sincerely hoping to be, maybe I can offer this guy some suggestions. He wasn't thinking while he was talking to this guy, how can I leverage this conversation so that I get something out of it? He was sincerely trying to help the other person. And if you guys have really been listening to his words, he's been very thoughtful in this interview because he's sincerely trying to help you. But it's not enough for you just to get the information. It's not enough for you just to have some designations or go to a couple meetings. You actually have to be willing to do the work. And that's really the big differentiator is it's, again, take the education, take the learning, take the thinking, but then get it yourself into action. And again, guys, this is what this market's all about. It's the different, you're not going to have too many deals just land in your lap in a market like this, especially as we go forward for the next few years. There's no doubt that the real estate market for the uneducated agents is going to get 100 times more difficult. Before, this market was about who you knew, and though that is still true, it's more about what you know now and if you're willing to apply it. Chris Townson, #1 RE/MAX agent for listing REOs, he's a perfect example of combining the two. Follow in his footsteps. Do what he suggested that you do. Guys, I gave you a free education on this interview. Just click the short sale replay button. It's on the webinar. Or listen to the 90-minute webinar we did. Listen to it, take notes, take action. Get ready for an incredible year. No question in my mind, next 3 years, maybe even 5 years, is going to be extremely profitable for those of you who are actually focused in on the distressed property into the world, which I think is kind of a misnomer, because the fact is that when you listen to Chris, he might be dealing with distressed properties, but he's not dealing with distressed sellers. These sellers are non-emotional. They're just focusing on getting the property sold versus the sellers that have equity. Those guys are under distress. Agents that don't know how to list short sales and aren't working in the REO and BPO space, those are the agents under distress. So everything's kind of changed, and it's not changing back anytime soon. Chris, so as we wrap up this interview, first of all, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your honesty. And your approach, even when we talked a couple of weeks ago and today, to the real estate industry is, frankly, it's motivational in that you're so humble and you're so honest. And, I get no ego from you, which is so refreshing. Because a lot of agents think that, it's all about me and I'm successful now and I can start walking around like I'm some sort of peacock. But that's not you at all, is it?
No, actually, to the contrary. I've had some awakenings over the last probably 3 years where it was crazy and we were selling 20 properties a month and it was just completely nutty. And looking back, I learned a lot of things. And actually, my effort, besides my own business, is I've been trying to give back to the community. I've gotten involved with NAREP San Diego here, a National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, to help give back to the communities that have been devastated by this financial crisis and the housing crisis. And I'm actually the education director here in San Diego. So our goal is to help educate our members in every way possible so they can better work with their community and help them through this crisis. So I'm volunteering a lot of my time to do that, and I have to give back to the community and the areas that have been so good to me over the last 6 years.
You don't take the business for granted. You don't take being successful now for granted. That's the other thing I have taken away from my conversations with you. Yeah,
that's been instilled in me by my wife over the last 10 years.
I appreciate that. Give credit where credit is due, right? Excellent. Well, Chris Townson, I want to really thank you for being today's Harris Real Estate University superstar. We have a lot of asset managers that listen to this interview, listen to it as training in some of the local, actually California-based asset management companies, because Julie and I have spoken at some of their offices, and I'm sure that they're going to be looking up your information. But in case they can't readily find it, though it is readily available online, how can someone get a hold of you to sign you assets to, frankly, maybe even just send you some referrals? Because I'm sure you'll take any kinds of San Diego-based referrals, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And any agents on the call as well are welcome to email me if they have any questions. I'll be happy. I'll probably end up talking to you on the phone, as I'm really not great on email. But my email address is reo@christownson.com. It's reo@CHRIS, T as in Tom, OWNSON.com. Shoot me an email. Let me know, how I can help you. And of course, if I didn't realize that there'd be potential clients listening. Hopefully, I didn't say anything that might upset them.
You didn't. You didn't at all. You didn't at all. I mean, you were being no. You don't have nothing to worry about. You don't. I think if I wanted to dive deeply into the specifics on how these asset managers, how they thrive and how they exist and how they're scored and how important it is that agents understand that. A lot of agents don't understand that. I think that if I was an asset manager listening to the pearls of wisdom that you passed along, I'd be saying, thank God this agent gets it. Thank God they understand what I'm up against every day. And so, no, I think you did great. So, listen, everyone, this has been one of my favorite interviews because Chris was not giving fluff. He was giving lots of specific information, lots of exact to-dos. What I heard over and over and over again from him was taking action. Everything he said was action-based. And you can't you can't be complacent. If you think that you're going to be able to make some contacts, get some asset manager relationships, and get some assets flowing, and then you're going to be set for years, you are wrong. The asset manager could stop getting assets. They could get fired. They get hired. All kinds of different things can happen. You have to constantly be evolving. You have to constantly be, Chris said it, prospecting for new business. Prospecting asset managers. A lot of you are going to get into short sales if you're not already. You need to be prospecting your centers of influence and your past clients. Stop waiting around, to Chris's point, for anyone to give you anything. You got to go out and get it. You have to go out and earn it. And then guess what, guys? After you've earned it, you've got to earn it again every single second, every single day, week, month, year. You cannot take any of it for granted. As soon as you do, it'll be taken away. That is a fact. So don't become complacent. Don't become complacent with your education. Don't become complacent with your willingness to take action. Listen to the short sale interview that we did, guys. Go beyond your basic short sale training. Go beyond your basic REO training. Harris Real Estate University, you know, you guys know we're well known across the country for educating some of the best agents. #1 Century 21 agent, #1 Keller Williams agent, #1, Real Living agent, #1, I can go down the list, Coldwell Banker agent. All those guys come to us for a reason, to learn how to take their businesses to the next level. If you've got 2-day designations, great, but don't stop there, for God's sake. You've got to improve your education. Start by listening to that 90-minute educational replay we did. It's on this webinar. Just click the link. I'm going to leave the link live, available for replay for quite a while, so go ahead and listen to that. Learn what's happening in the next few years with short sales. Learn exactly what you can be doing now to take advantage of the opportunity. Listen to this interview again. Listen to what Chris says about how you can get involved in REOs and BPOs. It's not too late for you, provided you're willing to take the action. So listen, Chris, on behalf of Julie, myself, and all the faculty and staff of Harris Real Estate University, I want to sincerely thank you for being today's Harris Real Estate University superstars. And everyone who's listened today, have a wonderful holiday week, and we'll speak with you soon. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Tim.